The reason I am making this tape is because otherwise I could be um, spotted as engaging in the evasive juggler's trick by hearing out the Russian point of view regarding the Ukraine while believing that the impact of the crime of the invasion on the United States has been to make us more authoritarian ourselves. And this suggests a wall of militarism to evade address of the Texas school book. Oswald, after all, was in Russia on a mission for the CIA. So if the leapfrog oligarchs are playing puppet show in order to make us capitulate to militarism and less tolerant of schools of thought that engage in diplomacy, it could explain the situation better than the narrative being advanced by Russia, which I find credible. Now, I don't need a UW dialectical certificate of higher learning to know that a deaf girl with Down syndrome who's a Korean orphan living in poverty and working at Goodwill, helping a fellow deaf person, represents the dignities of the poor and civil norms and human rights and is a romantic idea of comrade. Nor do I need a certificate of higher learning from UW Dialectical to identify the UN's special envoy, Maduri Goto, is engaging in a malicious practical joke and tearing my heart out to get me away from this girl, Jeannie, as being an example of abuse of power. So I have my measuring rods. And people might wonder, what was I doing when the Berlin Wall came down? And how did it lead me to put aside Jeannie in pursuit of Midori? Because it's a legitimate question, and it's one that's been used to fry me from the parameters of the Seattle left, where I'm strongly disliked. In the name of George Bush, which may sound strange to you unless you're willing to consider that an authoritarian partnership has been arrived at from the parameters of all sides to unify in refusal to address the issues that I investigated and raised for reasons that have everything in the world to do with the plotting of the Beatles and a strange subtext about John Lennon found in the Texas school book and in cinema tracing back to black and white Charlie Chan films. A Hitler semiotic about someone mysterious who escaped and came back to kick our bottoms. Well, none of that sounds like the narrative being advanced by Russia at all. The narrative being advanced by Russia may, in fact, be the same as the narrative being advanced by New York's Politburo, Spike Oldby, Mouse Spike Oldby, and Yoko Ono. A narrative full of viciousness and sadism towards me in the name of Midori Goto, which means that the Beatles media machine anticipated that I would appeal to Midori based on a value centric theory of East West reconciliation that John Lennon spouted. In other words, he was leading the reaction to trying to get a powerful lobby together to answer the evidence of genocide porno, knowing that I would simply be a fly in the Venus fly trap. Well, in 1990, when the Berlin Wall came down, Martha Gellhorn was raising that issue with me, tactfully and carefully. Meanwhile, Peter Gabriel and his buddies were stomping all over the evidence, lying through the teeth, and their good friend George Bush was insulting the Russians over the dismantling of the Berlin Wall, one of the most disgraceful and discourteous political performances I've ever witnessed. Somehow, the Ukraine became a briefcase for Biden and Trumpy, and then all hell broke out. Well, it happened sort of like a squelch system over COVID. I don't like any of that. What I do see with certainty is that there were things that were happening in the Ukraine which diplomatic forces were thrown aside deliberately to sabotage a careful, judicious assessment of what Russia's security concerns were. That's true. That's real. That happened. The Minsk Accords, oh, they say that the Russians weren't sincere about it. And then they laugh and say, we were just buying time anyway. They lie about what happened at the Orange Revolution and the Maidan Uprising, which was something of a January 6th that worked. They lie about the direction that Ukraine's authoritarian regime is taking that society as a proxy of the United States. The United States can't seem to get enough of refusing to negotiate in good faith with Russia. And it hasn't changed since they took down the Berlin Wall. And it wouldn't change if Russia complied with the negotiating process over Donbass. The only way that's going to change is if the United States reforms from within. The United States needs to reform from within. It's horrifying irregularities and absence of judicial measure. A sincere international law measuring stick can only come to the conclusion that the Bush war in Iraq was a hallucination of power that victimized millions of innocent people. This doesn't excuse the invasion of Ukraine, but it puts it in perspective that I think is much needed. And if in fact it's an alliance of warmongers working behind the scenes to enrich themselves, leapfrog oligarchs, then we're just being used to put on their play by choosing sides. Now, I think that George Monbiot is a good example of the British left that I admire and believe in. And the way that he sees it, the imprisonment of Navalny shows that Russia is unrepentant in the area that's most important when it comes to wholesome academic survival in the world, which is freedom of speech and freedom of mindset. Well, hold on a moment, brother. You're talking to someone who was poisoned by the Seattle left. His father was murdered with the blessings of a parochial extremism and the Zappas by what appears to have been the German Green Party. You're arguing about freedom of speech being sacred for drug travelers from the rock industry who poisoned me and used me for genocide pornography. What, may I ask, gives? These are issues that don't simply pertain to climate change. They go to the root and heart and soul of our ability to be students and academic regulars. So while I certainly sympathize with Navalny, I certainly believe the case has been loudly made that he should not have been poisoned in prison, and that he was just as capable of embracing change as anybody else with an open mind. That his corruption was something that could have been kept into perspective as a result of somebody who was possibly wrongly accused. And yet, despite the fact that he is in prison and held there, I have absolutely no doubt that the spirit of diplomacy and negotiations with Russia was violated from the very beginning of their own attempts to reform socially. When we put that much pressure on a society to sabotage their reforms, who is surprised when their reforms are sabotaged? My heart went out to Anna Politkovskaya. I was inspired by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who I've heard even Putin admire. I recognize in the diplomatic statements of Russia that they have maturity and integrity with which to negotiate. I find it an estrangement from reality that people would push a child over the brink so they could taunt him with madness as an adult. I'm deaf. I'm not a politician. I can't engage in politics. But I did my level best to warn you about a down and dirty investigation into what was happening in this absurd war game, Fandango, that they call a moralizing agent in our world. I think it's a travesty. And I feel a lot better putting that into perspective than I would being accused of supporting Russia when Russia doesn't support me. I have no idea how Russia feels about any of that, and I don't care. I was a witness to it. I can't pretend I wasn't. And the way they shape it and punish me for talking and poison me is exactly what they say they're complaining about in Russia. And don't tell me Russia is the ones doing it. Russia may be included among the ones doing it for some God-forsaken reason that has to do with terrorizing a poor deaf poet. But Russia doesn't work in the audiology department at UW Medicine. They don't work at Harborview. They don't work at Sound Mental Health. They don't drive big green machines around Capitol Hill, Seattle. They don't work in the unions at Community College of Allegheny County. They may have thrown in some pepper ball with Rosa. But Rosa doesn't stand for anything. When she turned on Cheney, Sean Lennon thinks that that's a higher brand of rational moral authority to have Cheney attacked. It's deranged. It's so deranged that one sees the invading forces behind it and wonders what's going on that may actually be explained as a hidden hand partnership and a cult like thinking behind the world's power structures who just are out for themselves and manipulating everybody else. These are reasonable questions. I think that they have to be asked. A lot of unreasonable questions have come my way. Why did you sleep with somebody? Why did you stop sleeping with somebody? What business is it of anybody else's? Does that mean you support not testing people? Where does this interrogation free for all with such deliberation and malice come from, if not the Texas school book that was planted on me as a child? And if, in fact, it does come from the Texas school book that was planted on me as a child, then it also comes from an authoritarian agreement. And I'm just standing up for my homegirls. They might not stand up for me. There's nothing I can do about it. But I remember a girl on the street being filmed. What am I supposed to do? Because the stores were out of masks when COVID struck. I remember Jeannie saying, lie, 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 when somebody told her that I was dangerous. Baden, the Israeli mafia, sound mental health, took so seriously the idea that they had to make it look like I was dangerous that they tortured and murdered people because I wouldn't cough up a threat. So finally, I gave them what they were looking for. I said, "I'll punch your face." They said, "Rubber stamp that uh, uh, parochial experiment on Mount Desert Island." He made a threat. I just remember Jeannie saying, "What a lie." People would just stop lying to themselves and being stupid. A whole lot more could be done with the problem. Nobody does. Nobody does stop lying. They see me every day. They see me on the bus. They say, "Hey, I'm 62. I haven't heard anybody." And yet they tear the carpet, rip her the carpet. He has to be depicted as dangerous. Has to be depicted as dangerous. Oh, hi, Mac. How you doing? He's a dangerous motherfucker.